Namaste, everyone. Our second session for the day is about the book Breaking India. This book is from by Rajiv Malhotra. Today, this few chapters of this book is being presented by Sriniji. Let me give a brief introduction of Sriniji. Sriniji is a short name for Srinivasan Sundaram, hailing from Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu. He was born in Karnataka and had schooling in Maharashtra and in Tamil Nadu. Started with a software professional career in Bangalore and opportunity to live and work in uh, had an opportunity to live and work in many parts of India. Came to States in 2000, lived for 3 years in Los Angeles and moved to Sacramento. Now living in El Dorado Hills with wife Kala and daughter Sanjana, a ninth grader at Ponderosa High School. Apart from sports and travel, Sriniji loves to partake in theatre plays, volunteer, meditate, and learn more about Hindu culture in all aspects. Over to you, Sriniji.
Hari Om, everybody. Thanks for the introduction again. I feel I got to change it a little bit later. Okay, the book that I'm going to be talking about is Breaking India, and it has got a subtitle, or what we call, that as Western Interventions in the Dravidian and Dalit Fault Lines. Is the title of the book, and it was written by Rajiv Malhotra and Arvindan Neelakandan in 2011. It was published. Okay, this book has got around 11,000 and 300 pages or something like that. And here today I'm going to be talking only about the first 700 pages, which is comprises 3 chapters that I'm going to be talking about in today's talk. Now, this book is very interesting in many respects, and he begins this book in the introduction with a couple of anecdotes which are very interesting to me, and that's why I'm sharing it. One is that Rajiv Malhotra comes across a student doing an Afro Dalit project sponsored by some of the universities in America. And he's trying to find out what exactly is this thing. And then the student tells him that he's trying to study how the Dalits were being treated badly and oppressed in India. And they were trying to use the same context of slavery that the blacks were subjected to in America. So they were trying to equate those two things. That means basically they were looking at the Dalit context of life of Dalit in India through the lens of American ways. What happened here, the white and black relationship, and the idea of slavery. So, which is completely absurd because the slaves went through a more difficult and worse time than the Dalits in India, actually, for most of the time, in most part of the history, basically. So that again surprised Rajiv Malhotra. That is one instance. Second instance that he talks in the very introduction chapter is there's a foundation, Wycliffe Foundation, which is tasked itself to translate Bible to 7,358 languages by 2025. I didn't know there were 7,358 languages in the world, but this foundation is literally translating Bible. And interestingly, in the 2011, when this Breaking India book was released, at the same time they were trying to release Bible in 6 languages which were quite native to Bihar, which were Bhojpuri, Maithili, Mahi, Angika, Surajpuri, and Pancha. Paraganya. I don't even know the name of all these languages. Sorry if I mispronounce. So they were trying to release a book. Now the problem is not with the release of the Bible in that book, but the ideas that were propagated through that book, and they were trying to build the literacy of the people of these languages using those books. So indirectly it was slowly creeping into a cultural genocide situation, basically. That was what they are trying to do slowly, but in a very nicer way. By giving away Bible first, and then in their languages they can read because there's not many other work to read in their native language. And then they're trying to build a history, and they are trying to generate. They're trying to give them a history that it is the Christ, who is their God and all that, and the conversion and all that subsequently would happen. So that is another incident that Rajiv Malhotra was very startled by. And then he talks about how he was sending funding to some of the schools in India, and they were not doing the job of the, running the schools, but they were in fact involved in conversion. And so after years of sponsoring events and involving himself in debates and research, he started to find out time and again he was coming, was subjected to this idea of Aryans and Dravidians and Dalits in India all the time. So he said, okay, we need to explore the truth behind what is the origin of this Aryan. Where did this Dravidian evolve from? What's their origin? So that is what prompted him to say this. That's kind of the exploring the truth behind that made him write this book on breaking India, because he found that these were the forces that were trying to dictate the narrative today, and they are trying to. There is a lot of cleavage in India at the moment, culturally itself, because we are a diverse culture. There were many weak links in the culture. So using this origin of Dravidian and Aryan theories, they were trying to break them. They were trying to create separatist identities, and then they were trying to create religion for the vulnerable section, basically, which is Dalit community. And indirectly or directly, they were involved in the cultural genocide which is happening in our country. So all that he's trying to address through the book, this book basically. So that's this book about. And we'll go to the first chapter, which is Superpower or Balkanized War Zone is the first chapter. In this chapter, he talks about, there's an inherent tendency built in India that makes it easy to split or to fragment it very easily. So he's listing out those factors at the moment, which are poverty, illiteracy, shortage of water and resources, which are causing a lot of conflicts amongst the people in India, even today. And social injustice, both historical and modern, people are subjected to. And there's a trickle-down effect of economic success, and poor healthcare is just not happening. The people at the lower level are not having enough income to sustain. And so there is always this big gap between the poor and the rich, which is again causing a lot of tension in the society actually. And then there is separatist movements which are happening at the same time in Kashmir, the most in Northeast, and constant terror attacks. And we are surrounded by very unstable neighbors, Afghanistan and Pakistan, who are always interested in causing more issues and pain to India actually, and China also interfering to Indian affairs and territories all the time. And these are the things that is inbuilt he's talking about. And the second thing is he's talking about is external forces, which are causing this split in the Indian, which are trying to break this whole country, And then those forces he's talking about how British created the atrocity literature when they were ruling India. The atrocity literature composed about, basically talked about the savage act by the Indian community on any other community, between communities in India. And so these people were, in fact, they were all exaggerated. Many of them were false records that they created. Basically, they wanted to say that Indians were by nature very savages. They didn't have a culture. They didn't have a civilized, they're not civilized people. So they are very savagery in nature. And so the British had to come here and set things right and make sure that everybody is taken care of. And that's how they try to justify the rule in India. So that is one of the things that the British atrocity literature was trying to propagate. Another second thing which I found interesting was, I didn't know about this, was a criminal act in 1871 was enacted by British. And this act called for all those tribals who fought the British when the British were trying to take away their area, or they were trying to infiltrate into the forest area and all that. The tribes fought back. So those tribes were called as criminals, and everybody in the tribe, right from the child to women to the older people, were supposed to be killed or decimated and people had right to do that, is what the criminal, they were all called as criminals. And the act gave anybody permission to kill those tribes actually. And I believe there was a tribe by the name Thug or something in, I don't know which place in India had the tribe by the name Thug. And that Thug tribe became a nomenclature or a new word for calling criminals around the world. It came into the English dictionary. Thugs came into English dictionary as a person who is committing a lot of crime and who is involved in criminal activities. So, which is again very interesting. A tribe name became a word in English. So that's what the second one is. The third thing is, I didn't know about this was a dowry system. The dowry system, I was wondering how did it happen? But I found that the British, in fact, nurtured the dowry system, is what Rajiv Malhotra has been saying in this book. Because during the British time, the British took away the women's property right. So the middle class was forced to have a dowry system wherein when the girl was taken from the bride was taken from her home to the bridegroom's home, she was carrying largely all the wealth that is supposed to go to her, so that she doesn't come back and ask for more wealth because she doesn't have right to the property of her parents. So everything was supposed to be given right at the gate when she was leaving her home to her groom's home, actually. So that whole dowry system was indirectly nurtured by the British, and they had this. They had enacted a law to that effect. So that's another thing that is very external forces that is he's talking about. The thing is also in the British during their rule, they had this human right accusations. They always used to subject the Indian textile and steel industries the people who are running behind these industries. They used to accuse them of human right violations, and they said that you can't run your factories when you are an accused, is what they used to dictate. And so many a textile industry and steel industry had to be shut down, and that was done basically so that the British could manufacture the textile in their country and steel in their country, and then import it to India and have the Indians buy it. So for that reason, they did this kind of things that British people did it during the rule. Now, there was one British gentleman, William Digby. He's a historian and he's an economist and all that, and he is kind of computed the amount of profit that flowed into Britain during the rule of Britain in India. He estimated to be 500 to £1 billion in those days, and in today's term, it's almost $1 trillion basically of money flowed from India into Britain actually during the British rule. And the last and the final external force that's involved in trying to break the country is all these private foundations, Ford Foundation. There are so many other foundations here based out of the US, and then the religious institutions and churches who, in their funding through the education institutions, are trying to spread disharmony and misinformation amongst the Indian people. And that in turn is affecting the psyche of the Indian people. And then that way they wanted to, they are indirectly trying to help break the India into multiple sects and multiple regions at the moment. And at the end of this first chapter, one of the interesting questions that Rajiv was posing is, he said is, we call all these Christians and Islamic people and all these people as minorities in India, but the question is, they are all very interlinked and they are well supported by the global majority, and they are involved in breaking India. So how can they be minority? So is it right to call them as minority? It's time that we call them as majority, because they are hand in glove with all the people who are, global players, international players that are, pushing a lot of money and funding for operations in India, basically. So that's the first chapter. Any questions till now? Nothing? Is it interesting at all?
Certainly it is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay.
And strategically important.
Okay. we'll go to the second slide, and this is very interesting. 1 second. Okay. Which is, I have taken the portions from the second and the third chapter, and I have rearranged it for my own narration, basically, in a certain way. Now, the question is, the book is about Dravidianism and how the Dravidianism is, forces are breaking India. But what we should understand is, Dravidianism cannot exist without Aryanism in place. So Aryan theory has to be accepted before the Dravidian theory is accepted, because the Aryans are the people, as per the Western society, be it British or German or French, they were the people who came from Europe into India, because India was not a civilized country. So they had to come here and they have to, rule us and get us to be more civilized and all that. And the local people here were Dravidians, or the dark people that they had to fight with, and then they had to rule us over. So the whole concept of Aryan has to be there for Dravidian to be there. So the first two chapters in the book, after the first chapter, the second and third chapter, is talking about this origin of this Aryan theory. How did this Aryan theory come up to being, actually? And if you really look at it, the Aryan theory is only hardly 200 years old. And it was from the late 17th century to 19th century. Even close to the World War II, we can say, if you can extend it, it'll be 250 years, basically. Now, that is when the whole Aryan theory came into being. Before that, there was no Aryan theory in the history anywhere written or documented. Even in Sanskrit, which they say has got Aryan, the concept of Arya, it is not the same that what this Aryan theory is all about. Okay. Now, India, during the Renaissance time, there has been a lot of trading relationship, and most of our communication was through trading was through either the Silk Route, through Turkey into Europe. And when Europe went into the Middle Ages or Dark Ages, there was because of the conflict in Turkey region, apparently, the whole European economy went down, and the whole European countries were all in dark. They called the Dark Age at that time. Now, after the Dark Age, when the colonials started traveling around the world in search of the new world, because the trading could not be done through Turkey, because it's a very unstable region. So they said that, why don't we look out for a country called India and let's start trading over there. So they were in search of a country called India, and that's how they started traveling. All these are my own facts. It's not in the book. So I'm trying to give some context to where I'm going, actually. So during those things, around 1700 to 1791, the translations of Zend Avesta, which is a book of the Persians, Bhagavad Gita and Shakuntala reached Europe. People were very fascinated by reading Bhagavad Gita and all these translations in English. And they were, the whole European theologians wanted to pursue Sanskrit, and they seriously started, getting involved into reading all the time Sanskrit texts and starting interpreting them and learning them. And they found that it was very rich, because it kind of inquired into an unlimited consciousness, and those concepts which were not there in the Judeo-Christianity faith, which was not there. All these concepts were not there. Suddenly, these Sanskrit text, Hindu Vedic texts were giving them that. So they felt very elated with this, and it supported their modern way of life to a certain degree. So most of the time, the theologians and Christian theologians and European theologians started debating and started doing more and more work on Sanskrit. Basically, they were trying to hijack Sanskrit, and they were doing that very well. That was one thing. Now, these are all the reasons why slowly the Aryan theory will come into effect. So these are the background, what I'm telling you. And at the same time, what was happening was Britain had established colonies around the world. French had colonies. Portuguese and Spanish had colonies in Americas. So they were doing pretty good. But Germans didn't have anything. So Germans were lost to the imperialistic rule. They were finding it lost, and they didn't have an identity. They felt that we didn't have an identity within the unified Europe. And French people and the English people called the Germans as barbaric, and their traditions are barbaric, and they were not civilized people. So Germans were looking for something that they could lay their hands on, which could be which could promote their ancestry or could give some boost to their ancestry, that they are not barbaric, but they are rich, civilized people. And so that's where the Sanskrit comes in. And that's why most of the universities in Germany, many of the historians and linguistic people in Germany started reading Sanskrit text, and they started relating to that and saying that this is our ancestry. Our ancestors were all, and then this theory about uh, Aryan came into being, because they said that, and then they enjoyed the text, Sanskrit text, and one of the theory that was okay. Wait, let me go to the next slide, and then we'll come back to this. And one of these persons in German, his name is Schlegel. He loved his Sanskrit to such a degree. I mean, he was a very learned person in both Hebrew as well as the Sanskrit. And he devised, I mean, he started writing out that he started this narration that Sanskrit was the mother of all the Indo-European languages, and India was the mother of all advanced civilization in the world, because that's what's depicted in those books. And he said that Indians in ancient India migrated to Germany, and Germans have a purer pedigree and written a purer form of original Sanskrit civilization. They migrated to Germany, and some of them went over to the Mediterranean, and that's where they started the Greek and the Roman civilization, and the Renaissance, in there happened because of Indians moving into Rome, and Greek civilization had an ancestry in the Indian subcontinent. Same thing, German had it. And because the ancient German were mingled with the local population, Indians, after moving to Germany to the north of Europe, they mingled with the local population, and in that way, they lost a lot of the knowledge that they carried from India. So basically, Germans were Aryans, is what he was trying to promote, but they lost the knowledge because they mingled too much with the local population, with the white population there, and they intermingled, and so the thing was lost. So for them to go back into India and say, they found India, having all this Sanskrit culture and civilization. So they said, I can relate to it because it's my ancestry. So they said that we have every right to that. And so they say, and that's what they're trying to say. Ancient German can thus be reimagined possibly. And then they were saying that, yes, we were all very advanced in our way of thinking because our ancestry is Sanskrit, and we were from the great country in India, is what they were trying to say. And so it was important for them to read Sanskrit to rediscover the German glory, is what he was trying to promote. And he promoted those theories there in those days. And whereas the Romans and Greek, they got diluted because of their Christianity faith, Judaism faith came over there, and so the whole culture, they degraded from the original civilization, and so they were being inferior. I mean, they lost their mind, is what the Siegel was promoting, that theory. So that is, let's keep it there. There are too many events happening here. So that was Siegel's theory. And also when Siegel said, when Sanskrit also came into Europe, earlier the Europe was completely dependent on the Mediterranean region. That is basically Greek and Roman for everything, for their cultural heritage, for the knowledge, for everything. But suddenly, with Sanskrit coming into Europe, the dependency on the Mediterranean culture was lost. In fact, they were trying to move away from it, saying that we are more, enlightened than you guys. So is what they started saying, particularly the Germans, is what they were saying. And the study of Sanskrit revolutionized the social sciences, history, mythology, and everything. It went into all the areas of their own. They rewrote their history, their ancestry based on this, what they found, the great things in Sanskrit, basically. And the one linguistic, historian, Herder, he said, he writes that Sanskrit belonged to the Aryan past, and the rediscovery of that was Europe's own foundation. That means going back to India and rediscovering was a foundation. Rediscovery was its own foundation. And then we went through the Schlegel's slide. And following Schlegel, there was a person by name Renan, and then Max Muller. So we will go and see the Max Muller's Renan slide, and then we'll go to the Max Muller thing. So Senegal said that people from India moved into Europe, is what his theory, and that's how everything spread, he said. But if you go to Renan, he changed everything. He talked about the Aryan invasion into India. That's when things start changing here. What first they said Indians moved from India to Europe, and then it then changes within 100 years span. It changes that the Aryans moved from Europe to India. So that's how it changes here in this slide actually. So according to Renan, also the Semitism, people didn't. There was a lot of what do you call it? There was a lot of hatred, or they didn't like Judaism, and so there was a lot of anti-Semitic movement in Germany, and because they found that the Judaism didn't explain everything properly, nor the Christianity, because the Christianity lacked a lot of things that they could not explain the human life. I mean, as to what was going on. So Renan's, for his theory, he starts saying that the Semitism, which is the Judaism, is based on a linguistically simple and monotheistic idea of God they created, and with that they just froze in childhood state. They went on carrying the same thing rather than developing it further. And this was taken over by Muslims, and Islam came in, and all that is they start saying it. That's what the slide is showing you there. But whereas Aryans, they started with the monotheistic thing, but then since they went to India and other cultures, they became polytheistic. And because the polytheism gave them a lot of creativity, and the various gods they created, various forces of nature they studied, and so they were more developed in abstraction and metaphysical and rational sciences. They became advanced in all that. But having done all the polytheistically, they were also turning to monotheism, per Renan. And that monotheism is the one that is propagated by Christianity, is what Renan started saying. So Jesus Christ is an Aryanized Christ. He's an Aryan, although he was born as a Jew. They ignored the birth of Christ as a Jew, but then they said that he's an Aryan, and he brought everything together. He brought the politic culture, and although he propagated the monotheistic thing, he said that it accommodated everything, both the monotheism as well as polytheism. Versus Christianity did it. That was a good logical explanation for them. It was a very convenient explanation for them that we accommodate everything, like the way we are saying Hindus, we are saying all that. So they did that. And now the question of Aryism, Aryans. So they said all the Europeans are all Aryans, and we are the superior race, and all that. And then there was a historian by the name Pictet. He took it one step forward. He said that since we are the superior race, and the inferior races are living in India and other places, we have every right to go and conquer them. And we have to eliminate them. We have to show them progress. We have to bring progress into that. So he started legitimizing the colonial rule, or encouraging the colonial rule. That's the right thing to do, because we are the fraternity brothers. So, and is what he started telling it. I mean, that's what this theory is about. Okay, now we'll go back again a little bit. So we went through the theory of civilization, wherein he talked about from India going into Europe, but Renan immediately switched over in the course of the time from saying that from Germany, from Europe, people came to India. And that theory again is very interesting. When the Aryan theory came of Aryans coming from north into India, they said they were all in color. They had a very fair light skin thing, and they intermingled with the local population who were all black. And then now the black also had another connotation, another explanation, which we'll go through again as to how it happened. The Africans were all blacks, and the way they thought about Africans is the Africans are the lineage of Ham, 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 Ham. he's the son of Noah. Noah, I believe, was one day naked. I mean, Noah is his father. He was naked, and Ham laughed at him, and Noah cursed him that all your, future generations will be serving the people of the other two brothers, the children of the other two brothers, and they will be slave to them. Is what Noah cursed. So after the Noah's deluge, the Africans were considered the Hamitic tribes, and all the black people, even in India, they were given a Dravidian blood, and they were also part of the Hamitic tribe, is what they were considered basically. So it's important that they were inferior by birth itself. I mean, that's what they were trying to say. And as a white, as an Aryan, was superior by birth. Going back to Noah's time, and Noah's first two sons and their lineage are superior any day. So they had every right to conquer and rule over the people, is what they were trying to say. And that's how the Aryan theory came into being here, in India. And there are many more things that was talked about in the second, third chapter. I mean, which we did talk about. There was a person by the name Gabineau, a French diplomat and historian, and he promoted the race science, and he said that all civilization came from the white race, who are Aryans, he said. Aryans invaded India and merged with the local dark inferior population, he said. And then self-preservation and purity started the caste system. This is a very interesting point. He said, this theory is very interesting in a way, because how did the caste system start, the Varna system? He said the Aryans started intermingling with the dark people, and they became Brahmins, or the light colored. They were not completely white, so they became light colored. But they didn't want to dilute that further, their purity, so they formed a caste system, and they called the blacks, or darker people, as a lower caste by birth. Whereas I'm a light colored skin, I'm a Brahmin, I'm high caste by birth, because I'm an Aryan basically. So Gobineau said Indian Brahmins were degraded Aryans. That's why they were intelligent, they could do things, and they could, they were well versed in Sanskrit and all that. So they were all basically degraded Aryans. They were not completely accepted as white Europeans, but they were degraded Aryans, is what he said. And so still the white people had to rule over these Brahmins, is what he promoted, the idea. And then there was this English guy called by name Chamberlain. He comes into the world. I mean, a historian and writer and philosopher and all that. And he started touting the theory that Aryans had decayed in India because they were so much away from their ancestry, which was Europe. They were languishing in India and they were decaying. And so he said, we are bringing in Christ, who is an Aryan, into India, so that it'll dawn a new civilization in India. So, and interestingly, this Chamberlain person writes a book on Christianity with the quote from Mahabharata right on the first chapter. And the reason for the quote, he says, is, the Rajiv Malhotra is saying is, he's suggesting that Indians knew about the advent of Jesus Christ, or arrival of Jesus, Christianity and Christ. They were looking forward to the great Savior. So that's how the quote came into being into the book on Christianity. And he promoted this Aryan thing and the purity of the race to such a degree that most of his principles and writings inspired the Germans in Germany, and it indirectly fanned the hatred of other races and created the Nazi Germany today. And the Nazi Germany, his writings were fundamental to that. And so he was honored by Nazi Germany. Posthumously, he was awarded the Seer of Third Reich. He was given the award in those days, Chamberlain. So that's the story about Chamberlain and how things, how Nazism and how he indirectly encouraged Nazism, and how Nazism came into being basically in Germany. Now, there was a professor by the name Sheldon Pollack here, I believe, in Columbia University, who apparently was given a Padma Shri by Government of India in 2010, not too much in the past. And he had written in his book that Nazism can be attributed to the Mimamsa school or High Brahminism, is what he was trying to promote that idea. By that, what he meant is Brahmins looked upon other caste and other people with no respect. They looked down on other people. They kept the Dalit, they kept the people of other birth and a lower strata in the society. They didn't respect them. So that view was taken over by Nazis, and they thought that okay, Jews and the other people who were not Aryans, who are not white, are inferior to them, and so they went on exterminating them. So that he says in his in his work that he, by following the Brahminic the high Brahminism school of thought, the Nazism went to an extreme, and by that they legitimized the genocide that they committed by killing millions of Jews during the World War II. So Nazism, the rise of Nazism is attributed to India basically. Indirectly, they're trying to blame India because India was the one that created the Aryan theory, the superior white race, and all that. So, and the division of Varna system and the caste system and all that. So the Nazism is also based out of Indian context. So they said Indian culture and Indian civilization is, they were trying to blame the Indians for that. And even today, and then after the World War II, the whole idea about Nazism and the purity of the race and the white race and the Germans being Aryans or the Europeans being Aryans was completely wiped out from their literature. But it still holds a lot of water for the Indian literature, our Indian narrative and Indian history. Because when we talk about Aryans coming from north into India, the Dravidians are the ones, local people here, who oppose the Aryans. So for the Dravidians to exist and to be, and the theory of Dravidianism to be promoted, they required the Aryan theory. So the Aryan theory is still very valid in the Indian context, but in the European context, it has lost all its color and luster after the World War II, because it was a lot of Nazism was an extreme thing that happened because of this. So they said we are wiping out all this purity of race and all these concepts out of their books and all that. So they got rid of that, but still it's in Indian actually. So this man, Sheldon Pollock, who writes such a book, he is being given an award, Padma Shri, in India. Which to me is very ridiculous. And that's why I put it up here. It was in the book and I put it up here again. And the same thing, under the same thing, there is a reading which I literally I've quoted it from the book here, is that there is a historian, Roald Hidberg. He's quoting another historian, William Nichols, who says that a remarkable table of comparison between canonical laws of the church in the medieval period and the later measures of Nazis, showing beyond doubt that the later were not original but followed a known precedent. So in this, the William Nichols is making it very clear that it was not the Indian high Brahminism or any of the Mimamsa school of text that legitimized the genocide. It was the practices, canonical laws that were followed in the church during the medieval period, which were the foundation for the Nazis for doing what they did. Is what he's trying to make it very clear. It was not the Indian philosophy or Indian theology which prompted Nazis to do what they did, basically. Yeah.
I think it's time for today. We can continue following weeks. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sriniji. That was a very elaborate session. Yeah, and we have some questions we can take.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So one question. There was an attempt in Germany to breed superior human babies, best in all aspects of life, but did not go well. There is a comment from Ram Dongreji.
Mm-hmm.
So Venkateshwara Rao ji is asking, the co-author Arvindan Neelakandan said, "We wrote the book for all Indians, for you and me, because we do not want our children to end up in refugee camps. Can you please elaborate on this? What is the threat for our children or grandchildren or great grandchildren? What is the threat for them, especially related to the refugee camps? What can we do today to make it not happen?
No, I think that's a very good question. Again, I think that I should have made it very clear right at the beginning. One of the things that happened in looking back is in Sri Lanka is the Sinhalese, because of this whole theory about Aryan and Dravidian and all that, the Sinhalese were touted as the Aryan culture, and the Tamils in Sri Lanka were told that they were Dravidian culture. So they created this divide artificially between these two communities, which was working and living there for a very long time. And so this created such a communal divide, and it inflamed the people there, that they all went into, cleansing and all that, the communal, that, that we are the son of the soil kind of a story, that we are a superior race. Sinhalese felt that they are a superior as a race, and they had right to everything, and the Tamils, who were Dravidians, were lower in the thing, and so they didn't have right to many things. So they had to be, either they had to conform to what Sinhalese wanted, or they had to leave the place. So they were trying to annihilate the people that way. It's like Kashmiri Pandits were being forced to live Kashmir. The Pandits were driven away from Kashmir because the right to the region, right to the soil, right to everything rested with the superior race. And when you have such kind of, even the cleansing in Czechoslovakia or Slovenia, the ethnic cleansing that happened, all based on the race. So when you start propagating this theory of Aryan and Dravidian races, such theories, when you start propagating amongst the people, it only spreads the hatred. So it's only a matter of time that most of us will be in refugee camps, because the number of people on this side is more than the number of people on the other side. So that's what he means. Indirectly, it leads to that direction one day or other. Am I clear? I mean, am I okay in that?
Yeah, that is one way. I think to extend to what Sriniji said, the other way of doing this is land grabbing by a certain community very silently. This is happening. For example, in Kerala, if you see, um, I was reading this book, Who Printed My Money White? This is by S. Iyer G. So in that book, it's trying to say that a lot of money has come, black money printed outside India came, and the land or on the sides of the highways of Kerala are now bought by Muslims. Muslims who did not have money, they were given money, black money, to buy land. And so almost, if you see majority of land in Kerala and um, um, Kerala are owned by Muslims and Christians. And we don't know. Nobody knows about it. Nobody talks about it. We don't know. Even Hindus doesn't realize this
No,
even
but you
today.
see, the whole thing about superiority, inferiority thing, over a period of time, the one side loses the confidence, and they're psychologically deeply affected for generations, I can tell you. And all the time, these people are always trying to conform to what the other person is wanting to do. For example, today, some Western nation will say, hey, this is the right thing. Then we have to have recognition of the Western world for everything. Or somebody else, we need them to confirm or say, agree, hey, that whatever they did is good. Otherwise, we don't even believe that whatever is being done is good. So we lose faith in our own self, our capacities of doing things. So this whole thing about this race is so dangerous, and which is not the real one. It's not a factual one. That is what the problem is. If it was naturally evolved in that region, then it's a different ball game altogether, because by nature it would have evolved in so many ways and things would have adjusted to itself. But from outside, putting this new theory in and separating and segregating people on the basis of the race, on the color, is the cause of most of the problems. So
Yeah, Srinidhi,
generation people. Yeah.
may I just add? Sorry, I thought you were done.
No.
To answer that question, Venkatji, I think what the ultimate goal of this whole exercise is, the process of conquest of nations or civilizations is not just through the sword or through the gun nowadays, right? It's not that. It first starts with a narrative, right? You build a narrative as to how bad and inferior and how dangerous the other side is, how unfit to live they are, right, as normal human beings. That's how it starts. You plant that in everybody's head, and then the justification for erasing that other set of people comes, right? So that's the first thing that they're doing, which is planting these fake theories in our heads and in everybody's heads, and then creating a justification to erase this civilization, either physically or at least culturally, completely finish it, completely make it unrecognizable, right? So, and if this continues, and I think Srinidhi covered only one chapter, but if this process continues and meets its objective, we will be split into 100 different countries, right? I mean, India will be split into 100 different countries fighting with each other, and there will be ethnic cleansing, and that's where he says we don't want our kids to land in refugee camps. So if this process continues, it's possible that our next generations will land there, and this is what we have to stop.
No, our contributions to science, technology, medicine, human body, yoga, everything has been hijacked. Today, they are calling shots on everything. They are saying what yoga is. And so all our ancestors' work, I don't want to see that go away. It's not that I want to, I want to have their name on my head and run around with them, cry out in joy, but at least I don't want them to be not recognized. It's my pride that we gave something to the world, that we are participative. I have something to give. I have pride in myself. I'm an important person. I contribute. That's when your living is complete. Otherwise, we'll all be very depressed. I'm telling you, we will never do anything in life unless we feel involved and we feel good that what we're doing is good. We cannot lead a healthy life. So the race will be gone. Our race will be gone by hijacking everything. All our stuff, it's theirs. Imagine like how today we are collecting money for building a temple or doing certain thing, or from running a temple somewhere. Somebody tomorrow takes away the temple and all its wealth. Then think about the hardship that people contributed towards that cause. Think about them. It's all gone in vain. Somebody came and took it away, just like that, because it doesn't conform to their way of thinking and their belief system. So they will take it away. They'll overpower us.
Okay.
So, but yeah, anyway, so it's a very, as I said, this book is about Dravidianism basically, but still we are starting with the Aryan theory first of all, and how the Aryan theory came from people coming from Europe to here or from here to Europe, which was very interesting to me because I always heard that people from Europe came to India is what I heard always. But for the first time, I read Schlegels, who said that Indians from India went to Europe, and they are the ancestors of Germans, which is interesting. So there are many such interesting facts that I learned in the first 3 chapters. I mean, there are a lot of stuff in there, but I'm not able to articulate everything clearly. I'm doing a poor job, I would say. It's a lot of stuff in there.
I'd like to add a point here. The movement of Indians into Germany, actually, there is a lot of truth to that. Back, even predating the 17th century, a lot of Indians were actually taken away to Germany to help understand our Vedic literature, not just limited to our traditional Vedas, but also the Vedic sciences that our rishis had passed down, including Samudra Shastra, Vaimanika Shastra, and so on and so forth. It took them about 100 to 200 years to actually translate and actually start engineering on those concepts also.
No, that's a very good point, Bhartaji. I really appreciate that. That's why there is this runes. I don't know how many of you have heard about runes. RUNES. If you can, I mean, just Google it up. It's like a like in Kerala, it's a very common practice where they have these seashells. They'll hold the seashells and they'll make predictions with that. They'll scatter the seashells, shells on the ground, and the pattern that it forms, they will predict the future and all that. It's a practice. Prashnam, they say Prashnam kekaradu, asking questions is what they say in Kerala. It's even in Tamil Nadu I've seen that being practiced. But the runes are something like that, which the Nordic. I was reading a book on that, and the Nordic people in Norway, Germany, and all that, they had stated very clearly that these runes are the knowledge that we got from the Brahmins from India. This whole thing. Yeah. Which is that is one thing I heard. The second thing was to your point is during when the Alexander retreated back because he had a very bad health. The whole idea of Alexander itself is very questionable whether such a man lived or not. But anyway, let's assume he lived, and there is a story when he was going back to Greece. He took away with him a lot of Brahmins and a lot of learned people. Promising them better life and better things from India. He took from Punjab, northern part of the country, which is Punjab today. He took them all there to Italy and Rome and all that. So even today, in some of the sculptures in Rome and Italy, you can see the lotus being carved. Because lotus doesn't grow anywhere else but in the subtropical climate, which is largely Indian climate. Conditions where lotus is growing. So lotus was not known to them actually, to the Europeans. So in some of the carvings in their temples, in fact, there was one place where they even have Ganesha in Italy. I don't know which one it is. I mean, I came across that, but I don't remember that now. I got to go and dig it back up again. So the Brahmins they took from them, and then that is what laid the foundation for a lot of the Christian principles of Christianity. The whole being non-violent, very loving, that whole thing started from there, is what I'm told. I'm not sure, but that's another thing that I was told. Two things. One is the runes, another one is this thing. And I know about the runes actually because.
Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of complete the rest part. So my uncle, my mom's brother, has been in Germany since 1950. He has met countless ethnic Germans who have claimed that all their roots are Indian. They're basically saying that, as you're saying, there are a lot of Brahmins that were taken, a lot of learned people that were taken to Germany, and they are the descendants of them. So they, even like Helmut Kohl, who was the president or vice chancellor a long time back in the 80s, he basically has admitted that his roots come from Kohli, which is the Khatri clan of families. Yeah. Okay, and then the word Aryan, I was talking to some Iranians, and they basically say Iran comes from the word Aryan, and they claim themselves to be the descendants of the Aryans. So it's the word Iran comes from the word Aryan. So it's very interesting how all this has kind of taken turns over the course of history.
No, but everything happened in the 200 years, and that to me is very fascinating. How so many theories. Anyway, sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, the Aryan invasion theory discussion deserves its own session. It's critical, and I think you covered it so very well, Sriniji. But it's such a devious, dangerous, implanted theory that has troubled our country for a good 100 years now, right? Almost threatening to split it into two or more countries. So it deserves its own session. I think it's a very wicked idea that every Hindu needs to be aware of.
Mm-hmm.
True. I think it will be covered in the next few chapters of the Breaking India, right?
Yes. I mean, as I said, only first, I've read it, and the challenge that I had in the book is like, I mean, I have got a few more slides. I mean, here I got it. This slide. It's not in a sequence, so I'm trying to put it all in sequence so that there's some chronology, there's some context, how it is flowing, to make our understanding easier is what I was challenged with when I was reading the book. I can tell you that. I don't know how many of you read the book, despite my talk here, but it's worth reading in so many ways. It's got a lot of facts, interesting facts here and there. You know.
Okay, I think we need to wind up for the day. Before we do that, thank you very much, Sriniji. I'm stopping the recording right now.